So, welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight, and today Michael Cremo is back. He got stuck a little bit in India because of the flight cancellations that happened because of the situation in West Asia. Yeah, I'm happy to have him here now. So, welcome, Michael.
Well, thank you, Judith. I'm happy that night flight wasn't canceled.
Yeah, that wasn't
So,
canceled. That is right. Yeah. So I um, want to talk a little bit about the website and what I found there. Even don't. Um, Now, my cat.
Cat
So
knows that he
yeah,
knows the
she is,
camera is on.
yeah. Um, so here. We have a Florentino Ameghino discovered a skull in Buenos Aires, Strada, dated at least 2.15 million years old. So this skull, did they do also some DNA testing? Do you know that?
Uh, in later years, they did, well, not exactly DNA testing,
Mm.
uh, more like radiocarbon dating.
Hmm.
So uh, I don't think they were able to recover any DNA from it. It's quite an old skull. Usually DNA doesn't last that long.
Okay, yeah.
Uh, it
And
was it was
yeah, go ahead.
it was interesting. Yeah, the significance of it is it just radically contradicts the standard picture of human origins and the entry of humans into North and South America. The current dominant idea is that the first humans entered the Americas coming over from uh, what's now Siberia to Alaska by a land bridge that existed maybe 20,000 years ago. So they wouldn't expect the mainstream archaeologists that there should be anything older than 20,000, 25,000 years, perhaps. So it's really quite extraordinary that Ameghino made this discovery in Argentina.
And how are they sure that this is a human skull?
Uh, there are different metrics that are used to determine whether something is modern human or belongs to some more primitive human ape-like ancestors, of which there are many that have been discovered and labeled as such, like the Denisovans, the Neanderthals, Homo floresiensis, or the Hobbit from Indonesia. There are several human ancestors. Now, the critics, like Ales Fridlichka, it's a Czech name. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but he came down from the Smithsonian Institute from Washington, D.C. to examine this case because he was very much into showing the faults and mistakes and any uh, claims that skulls were very, very old in the Americas. So he determined it by its metrics is anatomically modern. And for him, that ruled out the possibility that it was, perhaps as much as 2 million years old. So the anatomical specialist regarded as anatomically modern. The, it was found actually in the excavation of a harbor in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. They were excavating a dry dock, where you could repair ships. So they had excavated uh, below the surface to about 50 meters deep. And then they encountered a hard layer of what they call Tosca, which means hard. It's a limestone formation. It completely sealed off the layer with the skeleton in it from the surface, which rules out one of the usual counter explanations for such discoveries, namely that they are intrusive burials, that they come from a very recent level, as they would expect if it was anatomically modern. So, but that layer of solid rock that sealed off the layer with the skeleton from the surface rules out that possibility that it was intrusive into the formation in which it was found, which has been dated as belonging to the period mentioned.
Okay. So, in other words, there is a real possibility that we have been here not only for hundreds of thousands of years, but for millions of years. That would even go against, yeah, what evolution is saying. I'm not a fan of evolution. To me, it doesn't make sense. I also think that mm, it has a it leads to a very, very materialistic point of view. And sometimes I wonder if evolution wasn't a precursor to transhumanism. Because, if you're just an higher developed ape, anyhow, then there's nothing special about you. So why not merge with a machine? You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I think the evolution concept in general is a good one. Unfortunately, the term has been hijacked by modern physicalist, materialist science, and they have their particular vision about how it takes place. But they leave out consciousness. If you believe that all there is to reality is matter in its various transformations, and you at the very beginning rule out any kind of non-material substance, and you rule out the possibility of any higher design or control, uh, then they're doing pretty well. Because if that's the only resources you're going to employ for your search for truth, then all you can hope for is that somehow or other, initially, material elements, molecules combine together to form some first living thing. And somehow or other, it transformed generation by generation, gradually becoming multicellular, uh, primitive plants and animals on that level. And then somehow or other, they later evolved into more complex beings. It, it, but I think they don't have all the parts of the kit. Say if you're going to build your own computer and you buy a kit, and it's missing some parts, and the instruction manual has been thrown away, then no matter what you do, you're never going to get a working computer, by figuring things out that way and just making use of the parts that you happen to have. You'll never get it. Just like today, scientists have no explanation for consciousness, how it arose from matter, according to their theories. And there are also various subtle energies associated with the human form. And then you have uh, how did that happen? How did one species transform into another? They say by evolution, by genetic mutations, but if you actually look for a detailed explanation of how these things happen, it really isn't there. So I think Darwin had a good intuition that there is something uh, connected with an organism that is directing what shape, what form its body should take. But and I think he missed what is actually evolving. He thought it's the gross physical body made of matter that is evolving. But I think it's rather that the subtle material energies associated with an organism, the mind, intelligence, ego, these are subtle forms of material energy, and they stay with the conscious self. I think there's a conscious self that is different from the body, just like a driver is different from a car. Just driver's in the car, he's got to take care of the car. That's how he interacts with the world. But really, the driver is something completely separate from the car. It's just meant for a certain purpose. So all the different forms of life, single-celled animals and plants, more complex animals, plants, fish, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, insects, they're all determined by the state of the subtle mental body, which stays with a soul lifetime after lifetime through a process of reincarnation. So it's actually, there is an evolution of consciousness, an evolution of the soul as it gradually moves from one type of material body to another until it attains the human form. So I think Darwin had the correct intuition, but he didn't have all the pieces of the puzzle. So he mistakenly thought it's the gross physical body that's evolving, whereas the real fact is it's the soul evolving through different types of material bodies.
Yeah. Um, Also, there was, I mean, many years ago, this talk about the missing link, uh, basically saying, yeah, we will find sooner or later the missing link that is proof that this ape is the intermediary between ape and human. But as far as I know, that has never been found.
Yes, I think you're correct. However, they think it has been found. It's
Mm.
interesting. When Darwin published his book, The Origin of Species, in 1859, scientists, archaeologists, geologists principally, all over Europe began, and all over the world actually, began searching for this missing link. Uh, Darwin didn't talk about human evolution and origin of species, but everybody understood the implications that if life forms are evolving one from the other, there had to be some intermediate between very ancient apes that existed in the Eocene period, which is now about 40 to 50 million years ago, and anatomically modern humans. There had to be some intermediary. So they began searching for the missing link. But scientists from Germany, from England, from France, from Portugal, and many other countries were finding in very ancient layers not a missing link. They were finding evidence that humans like ourselves existed in these very ancient times. Actually, it wasn't until the 1890s, the end of the 19th century, that a Dutch researcher, Eugene Dubois, made excavations in Java, which was part of Indonesia, which was part of the Dutch colonial empire and at that time. And he found a thigh bone or femur, and that was a little bit human-like, and an ape-like skull with thick brow ridges. The human, anatomically modern human form is, for the most part, the forehead is smooth. There's no big bone of ridge across the forehead over the eyes. So he put the two together, even though they were found 50 feet, about 15 meters apart, in an excavation that included hundreds of animal and plant bones. He put them together and said, "This is our missing link." And this gradually became accepted in the scientific world, that now finally we have our missing link. And they had a date for it, 800,000 years roughly. So when that was accepted as a missing link, then scientists had to decide, well, what are we going to do with all the other reports that have accumulated over the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s that show anatomically modern humans were present before the missing link, in formations millions of years old. So at that time, you could say a process of knowledge filtration began, whereby those older reports showing a very ancient human presence could be eliminated from the discourse of science. Nobody wanted to talk about them anymore. Gradually, they were forgotten and dismissed, sometimes on very flimsy grounds. So that evidence, that body of evidence disappeared. And that's one of the major things that I've done in this book, is revive that evidence, and show that it was worthy of consideration. Another thing that happened was, in the future, in the late 1890s, early 20th century, anything that was discovered that was anatomically modern, looked anatomically modern human, that was older, the future discoveries, they were either interpreted in such a way that they fit the paradigm, or they were dismissed on very flimsy grounds. And the skull that we're talking about, the one that was discovered by Florentino Ameghino in Buenos Aires early in the 20th century, is an example of that. Uh, Elish Fridlichka said that if it's modern, it can't be old, that old, 2 million years old. So it was reinterpreted in that way. So it fit, the developing paradigm.
Mhm. Okay, so I will briefly share my screen again. And here we have this woven fabric embedded in amber from Kaliningrad Oblast, Russia, dated 44 million years ago. Oh, that is big. How, if it is in amber, did they manage to get a piece of the fabric out of it?
Uh, you can see in the amber the fabric if it's magnified somewhat. Uh, this object was, once I was on a lecture tour of Russia, and I was speaking at universities all over the country. And I spoke in Moscow at a major scientific institute. And after my talk, this former Russian naval officer came up to me and showed me this object. And if you look at it under not very high magnification, but it has to be magnified, you can see embedded in it the fabric. And it's hard to see how anyone could uh, do that, that it's a hoax or a fake. Uh, I I got from the officer the story of how he found it, and then carefully checked on the age of Baltic amber from that region. And the dates for it are, as you were saying, 40 to 50 million years. So that's really kind of extraordinary. It's a very extreme anomaly in that sense. And it should be investigated, I think. One of the purposes of putting together books like Forbidden Archaeology and Extreme Human Antiquity is to bring these cases to the attention of current investigators so that either further research can be done to either confirm or deny the antiquity attributed to the object or uh, encourage other further research.
So if I understand this correctly, they the this 44 million years ago is depending on the fact that amber was built in that region in that time frame.
Yeah, well, amber is the sap of trees,
Mm-hmm.
and it sometimes it contains very interesting objects like a completely well-preserved insect or bee or something like that. So there are other kinds of inclusions in amber, and it's kind of understood when the types of trees that are found to produce amber, it's understood geologically in terms of paleobotany what era they date to. So I'm kind of relying upon uh, evidence gathered by modern scientists about the history of amber. And as I said, the conclusion is that Baltic amber from the region where this object was found comes from that time period that you mentioned.
Hmm. Okay. So when you went to India, you mentioned before we started recording that you were involved in some studies about Vedic cosmology. What would you say is the biggest difference between, let's say, Western cosmology and Vedic cosmology?
Vedic cosmology is consciousness based,
Okay.
whereas the Western, modern scientific or Western, although it's practiced all over the world today, but uh, we could say it's matter based. And I think that is not just a question of cosmology, but it's a question that applies to all of science, really, that there's this matter based conception of the cosmos. And according to that, uh, the cosmos really has no purpose. It's just there, it just happens somehow. The most common theory today is some variety of the Big Bang, the idea that the universe is expanding, and that means in the past it must have been contracting, and they believe it contracted to what's called the singularity, a very tiny, extremely dense, extremely hot concentration of matter. So that is the big difference. Uh, if we accept it's consciousness based, then that means or opens up the possibility that it has a purpose. It's not just that we're accidental creatures in an accidental universe. It becomes more like uh, what is sometimes seen in modern science fiction films, like The Matrix, that we're existing in kind of a virtual reality system that is meant to educate us about our nature as beings of pure consciousness rather than just uh, robots made of molecules.
Yeah. But don't we even have this idea of expanding and extract and nah, the word is
Retract.
gone. Retracting, yeah. Um, don't we have that in the Vedic cosmology as well, with the breathing in and the breathing out?
Yes, it is there. There are some interesting parallels between some modern scientific ideas and ideas that are part of the Vedic cosmology. Of course, as I said, the Vedic cosmology is consciousness based. So uh, that is the idea that there's some transcendent conscious being that is responsible for the cosmos that we're in. And in the Vedic cosmology, there's the concept of uh, a deity called Maha Vishnu,
Mhm.
who is lying on the causal ocean, floating on the causal ocean, and breathing in and breathing out. And when he breathes out, numberless universes come out from his body, and they're small to start out with, but they expand as he glances at them. So not only is the idea that a universe expands and contracts there in the Vedas, when Maha Vishnu breathes in, the universes contract and re-enter his form. So not only is the idea that a universe expands and contracts found in the Vedic cosmology, there's also the idea of multiverse, many universes. Uh, so there are some interesting parallels there.
So that would be part of string theory
Uh,
with the
I
multiverse theory. Yeah. I have one question. Um, when the Maha Vishnu breathes in other words, the universe is contracting. Does that mean he breathes into a point where it
um, that's a very interesting question. Yes, the universe would disappear when Mahavishnu breathes out and the forms of universes emerge from his pores. They there is what's called the primary creation of elements. And this again is a parallel with modern science. Uh, the progression of the elements, like in modern science, matter exists in different states. There's uh, uh, what's sometimes called the ether or the vacuum or space. And then there are gases. Then there's plasmas or fire. And from that, from the initial stars that are formed from gases, come heavier elements like water. It's pretty amazing that if we look at modern science, explain where water came from, there are stars that when they enter their supernova stage at the end of their existence, they emit heavier elements. Like they start out with hydrogen and helium, which are very simple gases. They emerge from time-space continuum or the vacuum or the ether, as it's sometimes called. And then uh, the generations of stars, first they produce helium and hydrogen. And then as they advance through the generations, they develop heavier elements like the gases oxygen. And then later, solid elements like iron, and calcium, other elements. So one of the elements that emerged from stars is H2O, hydrogen, and the heavier atom, oxygen. So then comes water, and then later come the earth, or solid elements. And the same progression is there in the Vedic cosmology. First comes ether, and then comes air or gases, then comes fire or plasma. Plasma is a superheated gas. So the sun is plasma. superheated gases. And then from that come uh, comes water or liquids, and then from that come the solids. So it's a gradual progression, very interesting parallel. So that in the first stages of the expansion of the universes that emerge from Maha Vishnu, you get the same progression of elements from subtle to gross. First thing that has to exist is space to accommodate elements. If there were no space, you'd be in the singularity. That's so some expansion has to be there, and the expansion has to include the manifestation of space, which
Yeah.
gives room for elements to interact.
Um, do we know how long one cycle lasts of breathing in and breathing out according to the Vedic tradition?
Yes. Uh, One thing that happens is when the universes expand, Maha Vishnu injects into them conscious selves. They're called atmas, means conscious self. And religious terminology, you would call it a soul, an eternal soul. So they are injected into each expanding universe. And the reason they are injected into these universes is at the present moment, they're not qualified to exist on the level of pure consciousness. You could say, which should be the ground reality. They're injected into what I would call virtual realities in each universe. And to act in a universe, they require, first of all, a place to stand, a place to exist. Like we exist on a planet, the Earth planet, on the land part of it. The Earth is 70% water surface. So we need a place to exist. And we also need a bodily vehicle made of matter adapted to our level of consciousness. So there's a designer who designs the bodies and designs the places where we exist, where we can exist on this planet and other planets. So that kind of creator God is called Brahma, and he manifests, these different lokas, like we have the word location. That means the place where we can exist. So these lokas or planetary systems are manifested by Brahma. Brahma has a lifetime. We're going to get to the answer to your question,
Yeah, no
but
problem.
Brahma has a lifetime. His day lasts 4,300,000,000 years. He has a night that lasts 4,300,000 years, 300 million, excuse me. So altogether, his one day is 8,600,000,000 years. If you multiply by 30, you get a month of Brahma. If you multiply 30 by 12, you get a year of Brahma. You multiply by 100, he lives for 100 of his years. It comes out, that's the lifetime of a Brahma. That's when the breath comes in. When Brahma is first manifest, Maha Vishnu is breathing out. And then when the universe is wrapped up, he's breathing in. So Brahma exists for the time of that breath, which, if you calculate it out, is 311 trillion, 40 billion years. So that's the length of a breath of Mahavishnu in terms of our solar years.
Okay, that's quite a while. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So,
it's only one breath.
um, in other words, Mahavishnu is is it correct to name him in this tradition the source of life?
No,
No.
uh, beyond Mahavishnu, there is a realm where there's no destructive influence of time. Actually, each conscious self belongs in that timeless realm. It's only, and the ruling principle of that timeless level of existence is pure, loving, devotional harmony among all conscious entities and the source of all conscious entities, who is beyond Mahavishnu. Mahavishnu is an expansion of that supreme source, who goes under different names, but a very common name is Krishna. So Mahavishnu is an expansion of Krishna for the purpose of manifesting material universes for conscious selves who have a bit of selfishness, self centeredness, a desire to control and exploit others. That can't happen on that spiritual level of pure consciousness. Only one thing goes on there. This cooperative, harmonious existence of conscious entities and their source. So if they want to do something else, they need a field of activity. So the material world is that. And the material worlds are manifested by Mahavishnu, who is sleeping and dreaming, you could say, on the causal ocean. So the purpose of the universe, these universes, is dual, two functions: to let a conscious self act out its desires to try to control, dominate, exploit other conscious entities and whatever material resources they can command. And just like we see, so many countries are trying to control the flow of oil and possession of oil in the Middle East. There's actually a whole huge war going on about it. So uh, that is an activity in the material world. So either the conscious self can think, well, I am the temporary bodily vehicle that I'm in, that I'm falsely identifying with, and my purpose is to get as much as I can for myself, for my selfish purposes, either individually or collectively as nations or whatever. Uh, that's one purpose. The other purpose is to understand I'm not this bodily vehicle that I happen to occupy right now. I am the soul. Not that I have a soul, but I am the soul. I am the conscious self. I'm not the temporary physical vehicle that I happen to occupy. And if a person is successful in realizing that, and every resource is given by Krishna to help a soul realize that the Vedic literature is given, teachers are sent to this world. Sometimes Krishna himself comes as an avatar. Avatar means one who descends from a higher level to a lower level. So if a conscious self takes advantage of that opportunity, it, she may qualify themselves to enter that higher level reality. So these material universes have a purpose, and it's a dual purpose. And everything depends upon the free will of the individual conscious self. You know, nobody is condemned eternally or liberated eternally. It depends on the decision of the conscious self.
Mhm. Um, I do know that Shiva is the dest also called the destroyer. Where does he come in? Does he get active when the breathing in cycle starts?
Uh, Everything in the Vedic cosmology is ultimately personal. It's not happening in a mechanistic way. So you could say it's like a ballet company. There may be behind the scenes a director, but everybody has to play their part. And uh, there are all living entities, whether they're on the level of Shiva or Brahma or Vishnu, are expansions from Krishna ultimately. And Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva are, they have certain functions in the Vedic cosmology. Uh, the one you mentioned of Shiva, Shiva is the destroyer, and the destruction takes place uh, by his dancing and the music that accompanies the dancing. And, you know, I think at CERN in Switzerland, they have an image of dancing Shiva, Nataraj, Lord of Dance, doing that final dance of destruction, which is a force. Scientists call it entropy, the tendency towards disintegration. So Shiva represents that. Brahma represents creation, and Vishnu is the maintainer. And they're associated with three modes of nature. Nature has a destructive aspect to Shiva. Nature has a creative aspect, which is under the control of Brahma, and maintaining it and keeping it going and functioning is Vishnu.
That
And
would be the Trinity.
it is a trinity.
Mm.
Um, but ultimately, there is a single source of everything.
Okay, okay, I get it. So, do you have any idea why CERN put that? I mean, there are so many theories around that. Why CERN picked the Shiva statue to put it in front of their building. What is your feeling about that?
Well, if we look at physics, history of physics, we find many of the founding fathers of quantum mechanics and uh, those sorts of things were very interested in the Vedic texts. And at CERN, one of the major things they're doing is smashing atoms, you know, basically destroying them
Hmm.
and seeing what comes out. So uh, if there, I mean, if you look at uh, the types of people who are involved in physics and astrophysics, many of them are from Western origins, and they may have some interest in Vedic cosmology, some aspects of it in any case. And that's a historic fact. Uh, then you have today involved in these disciplines many people of Indian heritage uh, and different fields like that. So I don't know the actual story of who and why someone put that Shiva Nataraj sculpture, I think it's bronze, at CERN in Switzerland.
Mm.
But
Yeah, but it
uh,
makes sense what you said that if they are interested in Vedic cosmology and then the smashing of particles, yeah, makes sense.
yeah, and it also explains the directionality of time because it's actually a big mystery in science because the laws of physics are actually reversible. And just like you're drinking a glass of water now, say if it had an ice cube in it, you would always find it's just as reasonable from the standpoint of the laws of physics that at room temperature, uh, an ice cube could form in the glass of water that you had. But we see normally, practically in every instance, that doesn't happen. Rather, the ice cube melts and turns into
Water.
water.
Yeah.
So state of increasing entropy. And why things work like that is not very well understood. But I think the concept of Shiva and the destructive force, the directionality of time, may be explained by Shiva.
Mm. Yeah, to the Western mind, it is a little bit strange to think of a creational force and a maintaining force and then also a destroying force. But actually, that is what is happening. There is nothing here that does not end in death.
Yes. Well, Robert Oppenheimer pointed that out. Yeah, he was the American physicist who supervised the team that made the atomic bomb. And before it was used in Japan, it was tested at a place in New Mexico. And Robert Oppenheimer was in the bunker at that time. And they conducted the test and it worked. The atomic device exploded in a nuclear explosion. And he was asked, uh, well, at the time the explosion went off, he said, he quoted a verse from Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the sacred texts of India. And he said, time I am, destroyer of all worlds. So that destructive force of time, he believed, was embodied in that nuclear explosion. And there are actually accounts in ancient Indian texts of a weapon that somewhat resembles atomic weapons in its effect. They were called Brahmastras. So Oppenheimer was asked by a reporter, what did it feel like to be there at the first nuclear explosion? And Oppenheimer said to him, the first in modern times, indicating there had been previous examples of weapons very much like that.
Mm. Um,
I don't think that's necessarily a good thing, but
yeah. Yeah. So, but they also have an aspect of these, yeah, I would say what some people might call extraterrestrial influences with the Vimanas. Um, at the very least, beings that seem to interact with humanity, but that are not from here. But when you read it, it feels like, yeah, they were in a physical body, flesh and bone. Is there room in your mind that that might have happened as well?
yes, and that appears to be the testimony of most cultures that have existed on Earth from ancient times to modern times. Uh, we seem to be an anomaly in our modern Western cultures that we don't accept those things. Although, if we look at our roots, you can look at the European peoples. If you go back and trace out the roots of their ideas, you'll see that they had the idea, the ancient Greeks had the idea of gods, goddesses regularly interacting with humans. Uh, Germanic peoples had their concepts. Practically everyone had it, but it's gradually what happened according to the Vedic histories is that maybe about 5,000 years ago, people stopped doing the kinds of activities that attracted those higher beings to interact with humans.
And what was that they stopped doing?
Um, and in essence, they stopped respecting these intermediate beings,
Ah, okay. Mm.
offering them sacrifices for their pleasure. They just stopped doing those things. And uh, I mean, I don't want to get into criticizing, uh, different faiths and things like that. But in the Vedic concept, there was a supreme being, a supreme conscious, intelligent being who had an intermediate layer between humans and the highest spiritual realm, and those were the demigods, which if you look through, as I said, through the histories of most people, most cultures in the world, at some time they had a conscious belief in such things. And, as I said, if you go back a few thousand years and look at these cultures, they had that. Now, it survived even into Christianity. There were the angels, different hierarchies of angels. And if you go back to some of the early Christian fathers of the church, they had the concept of angels in charge of the different elements, angels in charge of water, angels in charge of fiery objects like the sun and things like that. They had these intermediate beings. So, what happened over time is that these, and this is connected with the rise of material science, is that these beings were gradually reduced to not very important. So they kind of stripped out the intermediate layer and just were left with a concept of God who somehow or other, not through intermediate beings connected with material phenomena, but just through maybe some physical laws that could be discovered by science. They kind of eliminated that whole intermediate layer of beings and were left with only a kind of deistic concept of God, that God started the whole thing, by establishing laws of physics, and then no further action needed. And then eventually they got rid of that too. So we're kind of left with as I said, the picture of we're accidental beings in an accidental universe made of matter. And we think we can do anything we want
Hmm.
individually and collectively without taking into account, uh,
So,
that
okay, so when, if that is the reason that the gods, the little g gods, stopped interacting with humanity, that they no longer gave any sacrifices. So that to me suggests that, first of all, they thought they were entitled to those sacrifices. And my second question then would be what type of sacrifices? Because in some cultures, we hear about blood sacrifices, be that animal or human. And I have to say that is the point where I react very allergic because that is very, very dark. I don't care if it is a sheep or, a human, not in the sense that I think a human is not more than a sheep. That is not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is I'm appalled by blood sacrifices.
yes, so am I. It's not recommended, but some people do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's called, there's religion in the mode of goodness, passion, and ignorance. So that kind of uh, blood sacrifice that we see historical records of is not good. And actually, according to the Vedic cosmology, one shouldn't worship demigods,
Yeah.
should be reserved for the higher beings. Now, and by satisfying the higher being, then everyone else is satisfied. Now, uh, but they're so it's a good point that you bring up. And it's interesting to have in contemporary times a discussion like this because we're assuming, at least for the sake of argument, that these creatures do exist and uh, that so we're having a discussion about it. You know, like it's interesting that such a discussion could take place in these times when the existence of such beings is doubted. But they, the reason they're in the material world at all is kind of like in a prison. Let's say you have a prison. It's not my favorite analogy, but they're prisoners. And some of the prisoners who behave very well, they're given positions in the prison system, you know, as to manage different affairs, to run a library, to uh, do various functions. But they're that is not the position one wants to be in. One shouldn't want to be a controller in the material world, which is what they are. It's because they have some desire to control, you know, be part of an administrative system. So they're given those positions. But
Theoretically, let's say a group of people decides, yeah, well, guys, if we want to have back our gods, then it's time to engage in sacrifices again. Could it theoretically be that by that way they lure them back in? Let's say in Chichen Itza, they start ripping out hearts again, which I truly hope will not happen. But could that be? Do you think it's possible?
it's still going on.
Oh,
It's
really?
yeah, there are places where people still perform blood sacrifices. But an important point for me is what the Vedic texts say is the sacrifice for the present age. And they say it's the sacrifice of congregational chanting of mantras.
Hmm.
You know, I could quote Sanskrit verses from various texts about it, but I hope you accept that in different ages there are different sacrifices. In the Satya Yuga, the first age, there's a cycle of ages called yugas,
Hmm.
beginning with just like in the year we have spring, summer, fall, winter. In the cosmic cycles, there's a golden age called Satya Yuga. There, the recommended sacrifice is meditation and yoga. Then, in the next stage, things become a little more deteriorated. So, there are sacrifices recommended that do involve, like a horse sacrifice, different sacrifices of that nature. But in that age, what would happen is that the sacrificial animal would be given a new life. And sometimes it might involve, so it wasn't that people were just conducting these things on their own. It was kind of like a state function. And it didn't involve human sacrifice, but it involved sac sacrifice of specific kinds of animals. And the people who were conducting the sacrifices had the power to give that animal a new body on the spot. So it, there are descriptions of low class people who did conduct human sacrifices, but it's not anything that's recommended. That was, I mean, there's story of Judd Bharat, and
Mm.
this is told in the Puranas. So,
So I don't doubt what you said, that there are still human blood sacrifices going on, but as far as I know, not in public.
no,
In secret.
not, yeah. Uh, but in any case, then in the next stage, the recommended form of sacrifice was temple worship.
Mm.
And in the present age, the form of recommended sacrifice in the Vedas is the chanting of mantras, which is what I do.
Mm. Mhm. Um, when it comes to that, I always ask myself, why should I sacrifice anything to a deity? Why?
That's a good question. Um,
Let's say, okay, we have this, what you just very eloquently described with the Maha Vishnu and Krishna and Shiva. Um, My feeling towards that is, okay, boys and girls, I'm a little carbon entity here. And actually, if you are that great, there is nothing that I could add or subtract from you. So what is all that sacrifice about? That doesn't make sense to me.
well, we do sacrifice to something,
Hmm.
like we may sacrifice some of our income to our government.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah, that is
Yeah,
not a sacrifice, that is more theft. It's a
or
kleptocracy.
one may sacrifice one's life to the military service of
Mhm.
one's
Yeah.
country
Yeah,
under
but
the
I meant
direction of a,
specifically to deities.
well, how do people regard these political figures? Some of them, a good many of them, take them as deities, or
Hmm.
we sacrifice to sports heroes, movie stars, musicians. I think if we analyze carefully, we'll see that we do make uh, sacrifices in terms of money and attention and focus of the mind on persons who we regard as superior in some way in terms of their talent or power or influence.
Hmm.
And we calculate there's some benefit from it.
Okay, and what would that benefit be? Let's say
Amusement,
let's say you are doing mantras. That is what you explained to me. So what is your benefit?
benefit is I experience some satisfaction and improvement in my life, and that it's good for others as well.
Hmm.
This is really a fascinating conversation because, like in the work that I do with the Vedic cosmology and the project, we have to consider exactly these kinds of questions that an intelligent person in modern society will ask. So uh, I'm taking it all in, not only because it's personally interesting in this situation, but it has larger implications for what I do.
Mm. Yeah, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to
No, no, no.
dismiss your spiritual
You're,
practice. I'm just
you're, I,
trying to explain how I look at it.
I'm very interested in how you look at it.
Yeah, and to me, it feels as if I'm giving my power away.
Uh-huh.
Hmm. And I don't see a reason for that. And the way I look at it is if you're really this wonderful, great being, there is nothing that I can give you. You do not need anything from me.
Yes, that's right. But uh, it's like a parent usually doesn't require anything from the child. But if the child say, "Oh, today's my father's birthday,"
Hmm.
gives something, makes a painting and gives it to the father or mother, it establishes a kind of relationship.
Hmm.
Although the parents don't need anything, the 5-year-old child, what can the 5-year-old child give the parent? But it's an exchange based on love.
Hmm.
And so you're absolutely right. God doesn't need anything from us except our love and devotion. So awakening, that is the main result, you could say, that it awakens a relationship on a higher level than most, or let's say some people in this world, I won't say most, but some people function on,
Hmm.
where they approach God, give me. I want my daily bread. I want my enemies to be destroyed. I want my efforts, whatever they are, to be all successful. So that is what I would say is the reason to do it. But if one feels perfectly satisfied doing something else, making sacrifices either for one's, because you have to perform sacrifice. One has to sacrifice one's time, one's money, one's attention to something.
Yeah, but a lot of that is voluntary, except for the uh, theft that the government performs via taxes. Let's say if I still have um, a sister-in-law in Kenya, so If I help out with the school fees or whatever it might be, that is a voluntary thing. Yeah, it is not that I expect something back from her. And it is pretty clear that on a material level, she cannot give me anything back. Or let's say I um, spend time with a friend that goes through a very hard time, and I just sit, listen. And if I'm asked, I may give advice. If I'm not asked, I will not give advice. Yeah, but that is all voluntary and it has to do with empathy, meaning you see something, you um that there is a need that somebody has. And because you empathize, you just do it and it does not even feel like a sacrifice. You know what I mean?
Yes, I know. That's uh, the ideal state of sacrifice that's voluntary. And it also depends upon in which respects one is expressing empathy for the situation of another. Uh, there are apparently some things that we can't. We can empathize, but there's nothing we can do.
Yeah.
It's old age, disease, death, ultimately, you know, you
Yeah,
can,
but sometimes, people that go through such an experience, they do not really want you to solve the problem. They want you to listen and to comprehend. We sometimes have this misconception that we need to solve everything for for all the people around us, but that is not always the case.
that's true.
Hmm. Yeah, so that was,
Well, like you said, if you're asked for advice, you
I
may
will
give
give
it.
it. If I'm not asked, I keep it to myself.
That's good.
Yeah. Unsolicited advice is is not a good idea. But you know, if I see and realize that somebody is just looping, you know, let's say that person creates the problems for him or herself. And it's always the same pattern. Yes, I will listen for a while, but if there is no development and I am at the verge of becoming a doormat for an emotional meltdown time and again, then I withdraw.
Yes,
Mm.
it's a good philosophy.
So, yeah, Michael, so good to talk to you every time. This time around, I think I will have you back a little bit earlier. And let's hope you're not stuck somewhere in the world. And we will
Or
definitely,
am
uh,
somewhere,
yeah, continue our
literally,
discussion. So,
continually stuck somewhere.
uh-huh. Okay. So, yeah, guys, that was it. Night flight for today. Stay safe and sound, and we see you on the next one. And now I should try to find the button. Ah, here.